First, Tymofii, could you tell us a little bit about, let me just start with your research. For those who don't know you, can you just share a little bit about what kind of research you do, your background as a researcher, what your method is, and sort of what kind of research you've been doing since the invasion of Ukraine?
All right, yeah, so thank you again for having me. I'm a sociologist by training, and in my career before Euromaidan and before this invasion, I was interested in various topics that are central for sociology, like religion, for instance, culture, values, national identities. So I was doing surveys or analyzing available data in Ukraine and comparatively. However, for the past few years, my work has been very much oriented on policy. When I moved back to Ukraine after receiving PhD in Madrid, and I also studied in Utrecht in the Netherlands, I returned to Ukraine to join Kyiv School of Economics as one of those places that is focused on improving Ukrainian governance through high-quality research and policy research. So we've been doing a lot of policy studies of how procurement works, or on the reforms of public health, reforms in education, National Bank of Ukraine, things like that. So it was a very interesting transition from, studying religion to studying procurement and auctions. But, from the analytical perspective, it's about data and models and the context. So apparently you can apply your sociological knowledge even there. And during this current wave of the war, because in Ukraine, the war started not a year ago, but in 2014 with the occupation of Crimea and Donetsk and Lugansk. So for the past years, we have focused on studies of local governance, both quantitatively and qualitatively. We have teams of people who traveled, who interview local activists, members of civil society, members of local governments. And we study these institutions and organizations because we believe, and we have data to back up this story, that decentralization and local government, they have been a pivotal force for resilience and for during this struggle against Russia.
So that's so interesting. And I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, how in the world does someone do research in the middle of a war? So could you talk a little bit about what it's like to be a researcher in the midst of a conflict, how you actually do your research, and how your life, maybe even your vision of yourself as a scholar, has changed over the last year and a half?
Well, absolutely. It's I can share a lot of sort of personal and a bit emotional stories. I don't know. I guess scholars in this room can relate to that, but I had some sort of a crisis. I was thinking, like, should I work in academia at all? Does it make sense? Maybe I should switch. Do we add any value? What is the purpose of papers that are rejected and you just write and being rejected again? So what's the purpose of all that? So paradoxically, now, during the war, during the most difficult years of Ukraine and of my generation, maybe this is the first time when I feel that I'm in the right place. I'm very committed to research. I have discovered meaning in doing research because now war prioritizes things. So we know what is important and what is not important, and you can focus on things that are important. First of all, we see it with our own eyes, we feel it, that human capital and social capital matters. Yeah, so that's what we usually write in fancy papers, but that's what we actually feel now. So people with knowledge, people with skills, people with capacity to talk to each other, to solve problems collectively, to organize things, they matter for country to survive. And social capital is ties, flow of ideas, exchange of ideas, cohesion between people. This also matters. So for me, to research or to be teacher now is very important because I feel that I'm contributing to preserving human capital, but also to accumulating human capital and sharing human capital. So this is important. And research now is focused on everything which can help us to survive and to win, but also to make sense of this war and maybe to learn from it and to make sure that it's not going to happen again. So I can give you a few examples. We have, besides university, we also have a think tank and a charitable foundation. And think tank used to be divided in many centers, like a center for public procurement or a center for public health. Now they are united in one big organization which studies and designs sanctions, because sanctions on Russia are very crucial, very important. And basically they prioritized this because it was very clear to everyone that this is priority. The same for our university. We understand now that a big priority is resilience. How to make sure that we understand resilience, but we can also sort of amplify, improve it. And then long term, let's say we understand that a huge part of the country is destroyed, we need to rebuild it. So drawing from this inference, you can say, okay, we should study urban planning, urban design, and we have to understand local communities, what they need. And this drives us to do new research with more anthropological focus to understand people, even though we did not have expertise in anthropology, but we just understand that we have to do that. Or let's say people are now talking about security and engineering and artificial intelligence as a way to build security systems. We understand this is a priority now, so we should go into this direction. So everything now is very much driven by the sense of what is important, what is not important, and it gives you a lot of sense of and power, of doing research, because it's like an extra motivation. And another thing quickly is about understanding Ukrainian culture, understanding people, understanding desires of people, understanding feelings, emotions of people, how they live through traumas, and what we can learn from it to rebuild the nation, to heal it, but also to give a better understanding to the world about what is Russia and what is Ukraine. For many decades, I think here a lot of people view the region through the lenses of Russia, through Russian literature, art, scholarship, but I think it should be reversed. We should understand Russia through the lenses of people who live in Kazakhstan, in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Armenia, and Georgia. And I think that's what we can do as university as well. We can at least start this conversation. And this really motivates not only myself, but all of my colleagues to do research. And we don't sleep.
And actually, I know that's true. You don't sleep. I've noticed he works 20 hours a day for sure. So that's so interesting what you say about resilience. And I think people would really love to hear more about your research, because from outsiders' point of view, we've just seen the remarkable resilience and resolve of the Ukrainian people. And I'm wondering what your research shows about what is the source of that resilience, historical, sociological, what would you say, economic, political?
Sure, it's a big question, and of course, in social science, there is never one answer. There are many mechanisms, many influential, many factors that can influence the final outcome. So when we speak of resilience, we usually mean that it's not just a simple resistance. It's not just that you can survive something or you can go through crisis. It's also about how you adapt, how you learn from this crisis, and how you build up systems that would be more better prepared in the future to the future crises, even if these crises would be of another nature. You learn from natural disaster, but you apply this experience to war, just like we learned from the COVID, and we learned how to work remotely and how to move employees and offices, but we apply this knowledge during the war. So I think the common understanding, the paradigm, a lot of people think that Ukrainians are resilient due to some sort of a national uprising, patriotism, rally around the flag effect, something that gives people strength during the war, sort of in-group feeling. I know that a lot of people also attribute resilience specifically to Zelensky and his communicational strategy. The way how the government has been doing its job is remarkable. But then there is also another layer of factors which I think are underappreciated. And that's also our almost agenda to talk about it. It's actually institutional change. A lot of institutions changed in Ukraine from 2004 and 2014 after the big political revolutions, Orange Revolution in 2004, Euromaidan Revolution in 2014, they opened doors for so many important reforms that are very sticky. Once you implement some reforms and create institutions, they are sticky and they allow people to have more resources or to have more motivation. One of these reforms is decentralization, which was a transition from highly centralized government to decentralized government with the power of local communities, the local government. So this new so-called amalgamated communities emerged as a sort of amalgamation of villages and towns that are neighbors that decided to join together and they received quite a lot of political autonomy and fiscal autonomy to retain high level of tax base at the local level and to incentivize people to open businesses at the local level. And what we know from qualitative and quantitative research that it generated things beyond fiscal efficiency. It also improved connections between people, sort of social capital. So people now are more engaged. People more often, higher rates of people attend elections. So turnout increased after implementation of this reform. Trust to local government increased. General social trust, which is a trust to your peers, trust to neighbors, trust to anonymous others, also has increased. And this is just the beginning of what happened. The so-called participatory budgets were implemented when people can actually vote for some budgeting programs. Gender quota reform at the local elections allowed more females to participate in elections. Public procurement reform made things more accountable and transparent at the local level. Land reform, so many things made communities more powerful and more independent with more agency that it's not a surprise that Ukrainians, first of all, they have tools to organize, they have resources, they have human capital, because now they have this amazing experience of local problem solving, but also they have skin in this game. You know, they don't want to lose what they have gained. So it's not just about national uprising and patriotism, it's also about a sense of community.
That's really interesting. And maybe could you say a little bit about the studies you've been doing, the actual data you've been collecting in the last few months since the war began, and what questions you've been asking, what you found?
Oh yeah, well, I don't know. I know we have some sociologists in the room, so I have to acknowledge that, you know, we improvise a lot. So maybe not everything we do methodologically is so rigorous, but, you know, you have to adjust for the context. So first of all, people still do a lot of quantitative data analysis. Surveys, polls are possible, face-to-face, still possible. You can do it once you define the population, which is, you know, the Ukrainian territories under the control of Ukrainian government. You have list of addresses. You can still visit them. Yes, there is a huge population movement because of displaced people and because of refugees, but there is a rotation in a way that, you know, a simple example would be Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. Some people left, but apartments are not empty because displaced people from Eastern Ukraine now live in these apartments. So you can actually draw a sample of apartments and interview people, and we're doing that. Another type of research is a sort of improvised panel data. So panel data is a type of data when you have access to a list of respondents and you contact them again and again. So you can track how attitudes, answers of people change with time. So once you have these addresses or contacts before the invasion, you can always, you know, call these people or shoot them an email or something like that, and you have a panel data, well, which is usually 35–40% of the original database. And a lot of sociologists use it to, you know, to analyze political attitudes and socioeconomic attitudes, and so a bunch of questions can be investigated. And of course, a lot of online surveys and a lot of qualitative data. Qualitative meaning that people just go to these local communities, we talk with soldiers, we talk with activists, we talk with people who who lived through the war. Of course, it's very complicated because, it's also about trauma. You have to be very careful when you talk with people who have experienced trauma, but there are some protocols, you can do that. And, there are a bunch of findings. So I think surprisingly what we know that still after, so many months of this war, there is a surprising optimism we see. So first of all, we see increase in trust to formal institutions, which is consistent even now. A lot of people would trust, depending on a survey, from 80 to 90% would trust to the president, to the parliament, to they would say that they believe that Ukraine can win the territory, the war. There is a strong consensus that Ukrainians have, they endorse the idea of that Russia has to be defeated, basically that we need to retake the territories, including Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk. People who live out abroad now, again, depending on a survey, from 70 to 80% would say that they would like to go back once the opportunity arises. We don't know if it's true or not, but at least we can see this kind of optimism. But we also see things that are not so good. We see that people are stressed. We see a lot of anxiety. You can ask a lot of different questions about it, including my colleagues from the Academy of Science. They ask this question about war-related nightmares. So they ask, have you seen war-related nightmares recently? And the numbers have increased dramatically in the samples, from few percentage to like 40% of people, 35 to 40, depending on a survey. So yes, we can detect different trends. But I guess that despite everything we know, that the economy of Ukraine has suffered significantly, and there are a lot of losses and a lot of stress. At the same time, we see a lot of optimism in answers of people in terms of support, trust to formal institutions, and willingness to fight for the land.
And so I know one of the questions you've been looking at is national identity across religious and cultural and linguistic divides within Ukraine. So what are you finding around that since the war began?
Yeah, so I will refer to some data of my colleagues because, some data I collect myself, but some data comes from my friends and colleagues from various institutions. And in Ukraine, National Academy of Science does a lot, and I will refer a lot to their surveys. So they've been asking the same questions about identity for the past many years. And usually the question is framed that people are presented with a list of identities and they have to pick one which speaks to them most. Like, are you primarily Ukrainian, or do you think of yourself as a member of your local town or village, or are you a global person, or are you a person who was born in Soviet Union? And people can pick the identity. So what we see consistently from 2014, there was a slow increase in this national identity, that more and more people would say that they think of themselves as Ukrainians. So let's say before Euromaidan, it was like 40, 45% of people would say that. After Euromaidan, 50, 55, 60, and now we have 80. So it's a jump from 60 to 80, which is a huge, significant increase. The question is, whether it's rally around the flag or not, will it disappear or not? But still, it's quite remarkable that, and from some other data sources which we worked with, we control that this increase is universal for people of different generations, people who live in different regions in the West or in the East, gender. So it's quite universal that different social groups, they have increased in their attachment to Ukrainian national identity.
That's really interesting. I of course follow the Kyiv School of Economics and you on Twitter, and I saw an interesting story about one of your colleagues, a professor a woman who had been to the front line and had now returned and was teaching. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about, as a sociologist, what it is like to have all of these folks, ordinary people who've gone out to fight and now are coming back and being integrated back into the institutions they were in before. How is that going? What kinds of issues are you seeing there?
Yeah, well, it's true that a lot of people in our organization, just like in all, it's a very universal phenomena in Ukraine that a lot of people volunteered and joined military service. We had last year we wanted to launch a law school, but we didn't because the dean of the law school volunteered, and she's in territorial defenses. I mean, she's not fighting per se, but she's in in strategic analytical offices. So she's like sort of Pentagon of Ukrainian territorial defenses. But we had students, faculty who volunteered to fight. One of my co-authors, a sociologist, he is right now, fighting in artillery. Sadly, we have alumni who already died defending Ukraine, so it's very traumatic for us. And we have people who are back already. And so this colleague, her name is Tata Margaryan. She now works as one of the managers of our global affairs office, and she worked as a paramedic for 1 year. So of course it's, what can I say? It's quite complicated. It's very difficult for people to be reintegrated, but I think they all just deserve, a sense of respect, normality. They want to have a decent job. They want to have a normal treatment, but also acknowledgement of the sacrifice that they did, and it was not for nothing. And I also think that what motivates a lot of people to work, because basically it's very binary now. If you are not fighting, you can at least work, you can at least do something for your community. And it's very important to show this commitment to volunteers so they know that it was not for nothing. The presence of volunteers have changed our life also in a way that we need to adjust our curriculums. So we teach tactical medicine, and Tata, she is one of the instructors. She teaches our students how to apply medical kits or how safety protocols, things like that. But also it's about mental health. Mental health should be a huge part of our life now, in a way that, professors, they have to be trained how to detect whether the students, if they have mental health issues or not, some early warning systems. So before this invasion, we did not have a psychologist in like an office of psychologists in our school. So we have a contract with the Professional Psychological Association of Ukraine. So we kind of outsourced this request to them, and they brought their professionals to our university. So so we have to deal with a lot of issues, thinking about policies, how these people can be welcomed back, and how veterans can find jobs and everything. We think about educational programs for them, so they should to facilitate reintegration. But also we have to care about, just things like being nice people to each other and empathy and think about mental health. It's going to be a very big part of agenda, not only of our organization, but all Ukraine. Yeah.
And as a sociologist, as you look ahead to the hopefully very near future when this conflict will be over, perhaps longer future, we don't know. What is on the top of your list in terms of the social issues that you think will have to be faced, and what kind of help will be needed from the international community on those issues?
Well, sure, there will be a lot of social issues. Right now, I think we're all focused on issues of, winning this war. We are focused on the issues of security. And then basically it will be about bringing people home. And to bring people home and to rebuild the country, you need functional economy. You need nice functioning labor markets. So people have to know that there is a country where they can live and there is a job that they can have. And I think that there is still some potential issues that we don't talk much about, but they will arise eventually. There will be new levels of socio-economic inequalities, unprecedented in Ukraine. To give you a point of reference, in 2014, when the war started, we already seen quite a lot of displaced people, IDPs. Tragically, a lot of people had to flee their houses. But they moved to specific urban areas. Like a lot of people would move to the capital city, to Kyiv, or to big city like Lviv. So if you go to big city, you have access to schools, you have access to healthcare, you have access to jobs. But now we live in a completely new reality when people, they just move to random places. If you have to run for your life, you just go somewhere and you don't know where you will end up. And now we have this new small camps or towns built it from the scratch specifically for refugees and specifically for IDPs. And these towns, sometimes they are located far away from, urban areas. So, and this is something new for us. We have never seen this before, and so we don't have strong policies and good intellectual ideas how to deal with this kind of inequalities. Migration will be a huge problem. Again, how, not a problem, but an issue we have to address, in how to bring people back. But we know that not everyone will come back, and it seems that there will be some sort of a need for immigration. There are some debates that Ukraine should accept more migrants from, most likely from countries like Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and we have seen growing communities of migrants from these countries before the war. So it's more organic, to kind of explore this further. But I think it's also, we should start this conversation whether Ukrainian population is ready to accept new ways of migration. We know from many research in Europe that usually migration from outside correlates with, conservatism and challenges from the local population. So we should be ready for that, again, politically, intellectually, how to address global issues, how to welcome migrants, how to build new societies. There will be an issue of reconciliation with Russia. I'm sure that no one is, not ready to talk about. I am not ready to talk about this right now. I'm thinking now only about the war and the victory, but in 10, 15 years from now, we will have to think about it. So yeah, so I guess it's a huge challenge for intellectuals, for scholars to be focused on specific issues, but also be open-minded and prepared for future issues to come. So yeah, a lot. So let me tell, socioeconomic inequalities. Just to pick one, it will be inequalities for me.
That is absolutely fascinating. It's something I hadn't thought of. Let me close by just asking you a question that I ask all of our guests, which is, as you think about the near future right now, what keeps you up at night? What are you most worried about? And also, where do you most find your hope?
Yeah. So in terms of being worried and my fears, I think, to be honest, the biggest fear I have is that people will learn nothing from it. That there is a huge war. We are sacrificing a lot. We're sacrificing our lives, and I'm just afraid that people will not learn from it. That there will be more wars, and more issues. And I think that, I think that Ukrainians have shown something to the world, that we kind of, we can be resilient. We understand the context. We have our view of Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian history, but also Russian culture and Russian history. And we believe that a huge dialogue should be started about Russia as a colonial state, as imperialistic state, and that Russia as it is now should be defeated, and more agency and more intellectual sovereignty should be given to countries that are underappreciated. I think countries like Belarus or Ukraine or Georgia, Armenia, and we have to learn a lot from this war to build very strong democratic institutions that would prevent us from having such wars in the future. And this is my fear, that like in 10, 15, 20, 30 years, if another war will come, and I don't want it to happen. I want our societies to learn from it, and never again. That's what we said after the First World War. Yeah, never again. So maybe we should say it again. And what keeps me optimistic. People. I mean, I learned a lot about people, about my students, my girlfriend, myself. You know, people in crisis, they can do incredible things if people are kind to each other, if people have empathy, people can coordinate, cooperate. People. You just have to believe in people, and you have to support people, and people will support you. It's such a basic thing, but apparently we know how to survive through most terrible challenges, and I think this is what keeps me also optimistic, that I learned a lot about humanity. I met my neighbors in the bomb shelter first time. You know, in big cities, you don't know the names of your neighbors, but you know, now I know names of cats of my neighbors, and they're very nice people, and you know, it's bad I didn't talk to them before the war. Why? I don't know why. So I learned a lot about humanity and people, and that people are nice, and together we can do a lot of things.
What an incredible answer. Thank you. We have time for some questions. So please just identify yourself. Any questions, comments? Yeah, you're here, Renal.
Hi, my name is Reinaldo Morales. I'm a professor at Medill School of Journalism and also part of the Buffett Institute. I met at the United Nations Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues, a representative of the Iranian government, and we spoke about the indigenous peoples from Crimea. You mentioned issues of identity and how through this war, there are many different identities that have been revised, rediscussed, and emerging. So how the indigenous peoples, the identity of the indigenous peoples of Ukraine is being discussed and addressed in this war?
Sure. It is one of the most central questions of this war, since Crimea, we can say that everything started with Crimea, and Crimean Tatars are indigenous population, and many of them suffer now in Crimea because they stayed in Crimea. They don't want to leave. This is their home. I don't know if people know this history, but Crimean Tatars were deported after the Second World War by Stalin to places like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. Most of them lived there all their lives or were born in Uzbekistan, and they returned to Crimea after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So for them, this is their home. And unfortunately, a lot of people had to flee, or some people are not, they just cannot go back to Crimea. And there is a consensus that, they should be back and they should live in their homes, being free in the democratic society. So right now there is a certain kind of consensus and a lot of goodwill that Crimean Tatars are considered to be a part of Ukrainian political nation, in a way that people can have different ethnicities and they can speak different languages, but they adhere to the same idea of political nation, and Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars are members of the same political nation. A lot of Crimean Tatars are fighting in this war, and a lot of Crimean Tatars participate in cultural and diplomatic events to support Ukraine, starting from popular singers like Jamala, who won Eurovision. She's Crimean Tatar, and my friend Ali Maliyev, who is one of the managers of the Ukrainian Institute. Ukrainian Institute is an organization which is equivalent to Goethe Institute or British Council. It's like a cultural representation of Ukraine in other countries, and Crimean Tatars are running it. So this is a huge part of this group is a huge part of Ukrainian narrative now. And they have a lot of respect in Ukraine, sure. And my favorite restaurant, of course, is Crimean Tatar.
Hi, Liz Gerber. I'm from the School of Engineering. So as a human being, I'm deeply moved by your comment that we do not learn from this war. As a scholar of technology, I'm deeply interested in the idea of how generative AI will help us generate new solutions in the future. And so I want to put this question towards you, reconcile these two ideas. If we need, presumably, if we're not going to have wars again, we need new approaches. Can you speculate on the potential role of AI either in exacerbating war or potentially decreasing it?
Sure. Well, there is a way to kind of circumvent this question because it's very big, it's very complicated. I don't know how to answer it, but at least, yeah, there are some things that are already happening. You know, it's very difficult to predict what happens in the future, but at least we can speculate about what's happening now and trying to make sense of what's happening now. So people use artificial intelligence devices. Well, when I say devices, I mean that tools are now already accessible to people, and there is a big exposure to tools that use artificial intelligence. And people use it on both sides. Sometimes people use it to generate messages, images, videos, or texts to share propaganda, to share misinformation. And this has happened in Ukraine already. On the other hand, you can also use it to address, to design systems to monitor propaganda and to detect propaganda and to address it. So this has been a big part of our warfare already, for sure. So I guess your question, another part of this answer would be that in Ukraine, there are a lot of new organizations, companies, individual engineers who use artificial intelligence to try to solve problems with image recognition. So specifically, we are very stressed about mines, that everything is mined. You know, it's not very easy to detect a mine, and you need sophisticated, let's say, drones that have a lot of video and photos, so you can use this image recognition to understand the patterns. You can also think about allocation of resources. It can be allocation of troops or allocation of mines as sort of a graph, you know, and you can also try to understand patterns. So people apply these technologies to solve everyday tasks, but whether we will use artificial intelligence as like sort of a, yeah, sort of like
a good Buffett project. We should work on that one. We got to work on that one.
Yeah, is this a device to generate ideas about peace, or this is like a new nuclear sort of deterrent system? Our artificial intelligence is better than your artificial intelligence? I don't know. I have no clue, but at least we embrace it in our university. We embrace it, and we use ChatGPT, for instance, to we allow our students to play around with it and to use it in their education and research projects, because we just believe that this is a very important skill for people in the future. But what they will do with it, I have no idea. Yeah.
Great, thank you. We've got a great question from one of our viewers online, is asking, how has the recent experience of the war affected the general population's tolerance towards minority religious groups? And I wonder if you could comment a little bit about the narratives out there about Nazism, anti-Semitism, et cetera, that one hears about quite a bit in the media.
My favorite narratives. No, look, it's a complicated question. I think religion has become a very big part of narratives about what's happening now in Ukraine, because people see the news, people see that religion and national identity kind of correlates and go together. So people try to make sense of what is happening. So I would say that for many decades, and this is a part of my research, for many decades, Ukraine has been described in scholarship using these words as American model. So when sociologists say American model, it means pluralism, religious pluralism. We have a lot of religious groups coincide together in the same regions, and there can be Orthodox Church, but there are many different Orthodox churches. They just divide it in jurisdictions, and they belong to different jurisdictions. There are Greek Catholics and Roman Catholics, Crimean Tatars that are Muslims, and traditional historical populations of Jewish communities in urban areas. So there are a lot of different religious groups, but the point here is also that there is no territory that has religious monopoly. So you can construct indexes to measure sort of whether this religious market is regulated or it has a lot of competition. So there is no region with only one religious group being monopolistic. There is always a competition. A competition also happens at the national level, because there are different like crucial religious groups that are big, that are important, and they compete with each other for kind of political representation and political influence. And there is no one church that has managed to be the church, like the state church. There is always a competition, and historically, let's say one president favors one church, but another president favors another church. So it's very fluid. No one managed to become like a dominant group. And yeah, so there is a huge competition of narratives. So I don't see that there is right now an issue of repressions or marginalization of ethnic or religious groups in Ukraine. There is, however, an issue that we can discuss. I think maybe this is what this person refers to, is to specific case of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which has connections with Russian Orthodox Church, which is a Moscow Patriarchate, so-called Moscow Patriarchate Church. Even though members of this church, they don't like to be called like that. They say, no, we're Ukrainian church, stop calling us that. But for simplicity, I will refer to them as Moscow Patriarchate just in this room. So this church is quite unique in a way that it's not a monolith. There are communities that are more kind of sort of committed to the idea of Ukrainian nation. There are communities that are not. It has been shown that Russian forces has used church as a tool of diplomatic influence and soft power. So you know, this church echoes narratives of Russia. They bring narratives of Russia to Ukrainian media. They, during the prayer, you can listen occasionally that the priest would say something about mighty Russia and Putin and something like that. Special forces already reported that these Ukrainian Orthodox churches affiliated with Russia, that there were these special forces arrested some priests and discovered that they had, you know, like Russian passports, or they had weapons or money, or, you know, just being hidden in churches. So I think the point here is that there are some specific parts of this organization that are exploited as a device of, you know, soft power, but also intelligence, like Russian intelligence. And I think Ukrainian government is doing a great job by addressing it from the security perspective. But I do not think that it should be considered as oppressive action against the religious group. So.
Questions on this side? No? Okay. Yeah, please go ahead. Wait, so we've got one right here in the front. Oh, sorry. Yep.
Many of us in America really are interested in, among the things we give to charity, to try to help people in Ukraine. Are you willing to say anything about any place or places that you recommend we might consider as ways to donate to help people in Ukraine?
Okay, yeah. Thank you for this question. So in general, there are a lot of activities. I think it's also a testament to what Ukrainians are doing now. There are so many different charitable organizations and individuals and NGOs and governmental that can help to, you know, to support local communities. We as an organization, we also do that. Kyiv School of Economics has its own charitable foundation, which is registered in the US as well, not only in Ukraine, which help us to fundraise internationally. I mean, you can visit our website, you can find all about it. We have raised more than $55 million already to purchase medical kits, helmets, cars, food, and to deliver it to sometimes even to the front lines. And we also rebuild schools, shelters in the schools. We rebuilt a clinic in northern part of Kyiv. So we've been doing quite a lot. And there is another part of this effort, which is to support specifically education, because as we discussed, we believe that, you know, human capital matters, social capital matters. So education during the war should be accessible to many students, even if these students, they live in, you know, the occupied territories, or if their parents died during the war. So these kids can afford to study. We also fundraise for scholarships and tuition fees. And yeah, and you can visit our website of Kyiv School of Economics, KSC. What is my website? I don't remember, but Kyiv School of Economics, Charitable Foundation, just Google it and you will find it.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question online about ordinary Russian men who escaped to Ukraine to avoid the draft, not soldiers, but ordinary people. First of all, are there many such people, and how have they been treated when they arrive in Ukraine?
Well, I think these are really minority cases. I don't think that there is a huge flow. Also, Ukrainian government regulates this kind of trips. Any Russian male would be considered as a suspicious person, and would be investigated. So I would say that historically, there are cases, and there are political scholars who study it. So there are people from both Russia and Belarus who come to Ukraine even to fight to join volunteering regiments and units to fight. So case by case, occasionally you can find this, but I think it's like more marginal cases. I guess the bigger question that can be inferred from this question is, in general, what Ukrainians think about Russians, how Ukrainians treat Russians. And it's a complicated question. Ukrainians are traumatized by the war. Ukrainians are obviously very upset with Russians and Russian government, but also Russian civil society and Russian intellectuals. It's a huge debate within Ukrainian society, how to talk, whether to talk, how to do, what should we do now? So there is no answer to this question, no good answer. I have to say that with my colleague from Northwestern, Jordan Gans-Morse, he's a political scientist. He's present here in the room. With another colleague, we conducted a survey of Ukrainians maybe after 1 month of the invasion. And we asked them if they still speak to their Russian relatives. So it was a survey, and we asked whether they have someone in Russia, like maybe a cousin, a father, a distant relative, and whether they speak to them. So first of all, a big part of a sample did have someone in Russia. I think like almost 60% or something like that. It was a big chunk of the sample. And most of them did, at that moment, it was the first months of the invasion, at that moment they did talk. And we asked questions like, do you think that your Russian relatives actually, are they affected by propaganda? And most of respondents agreed to that Russian relatives would rather believe to Russian TV than to, conversation with a relative. So I think that's why quite a lot of Ukrainians are very upset. It's not just about trauma, and it's not that just about the government. We're also upset with society in general, that a lot of people, they either endorse the war, or they don't know what to do, or they're just too lost that they cannot fix these problems. And we are upset with civil society and with political figures in Russia who also seems to be lost, and they don't know how to fix these problems. So what can I say? I think the only way reconciliation can be possible is when things are fully acknowledged. So when the war is over, and when there is a big conversation about what happened, with recognition of war crimes and with sincere apologies, only then I think we will start talking about the future.
Thank you. Questions? Got one here.
I'm also an engineer by trade, but with the tremendous destruction of infrastructure, can you see a place for both AI and helping restore that? And in changing, what's the priorities to be restored first?
Well, it's a good question in a way that, for me, this is a question about, I would rephrase it. So you say, what should be restored as a sort of, we need to start from the scratch. Yeah, we don't need to rebuild what was there before. We don't need these coal mines, or because we live in this new world. And this new world has a lot of new challenges, including climate change or global movement of population. So we have to, while rebuilding Ukraine, we need to incorporate these ideas into rebuilding Ukraine. Now the question is, who is going to ask this question and how should we solve them? Should it be a smart Ukrainian politician? Should it be artificial intelligence? I don't care. Like someone just has to do it, and yeah.
Really interesting. This is a little bit outside your area of research, but there's a question online about China and how you view China's influence on this war and whether you think China can play a role in finding a peaceful solution to ending the conflict.
Yeah, well, it's a pattern. Every time I talk or present somewhere in the American audience, sooner or later, the question will be about China. And of course, they play a huge role globally and in this specific war. I think what we have seen through, through our investigations and, many other sources, that Russia has circumvented part of the sanctions with the support of China. There was a flow of goods or technologies through China, and there was a diplomatic sort of not endorsement, but at least support from China. And we also know that China plays it strategically, that there were some diplomatic negotiations between Ukrainian president and China's office. So what can I say? It's a huge global player. We definitely should to think about their role. Also, not only in influence in Russia, but influence in global South. So there is, I mean, global South sounds too vague. It's what people say, but in fact, when people say global South, they mean everything except European Union and America and Canada. So it's Latin America, Africa, Middle East, Asia, and seems like China has a very strong influence, not just economically or politically, but has influence on narratives in media in many African countries and Asian countries, and we as Ukrainians should deal with that as well. So there was a survey conducted by Open Society Foundation. It was conducted like a year ago in September, and it was conducted in all these countries that are labeled as Global South. And there was a huge variation. So in questions like whether the respondents in these countries, whether they believe that Ukraine is democratic and Russia is authoritarian, whether they believe that Ukraine is attacked by a bigger colonial state or not, whether they believe that Russia should be sanctioned, whether there is a risk of the Third World War and nukes, the variation was huge. There is no one global South. It seems that countries in Latin America are more sympathetic to Ukraine, countries in Asia and Africa are more sympathetic to Russia, and it seems like the crucial question is who shapes the narratives there, and Russia and China have been quite smart and strategic in shaping narratives there, and I think Ukraine should, work on this front as well.
Thank you. Question over here, I think, right? Question? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
So my name is Sela Haka and I teach at ethics at Loyola University Chicago. I want to come back to something that you alluded to in the beginning, framing it in my own way. There's a depth of rupture and loss, mourning that accompanies any war. And I wonder, there are teams now out there who are kind of gathering the evidence of sexual violence or violence and all these gruesome crimes against humanity in Ukraine. But we know from the experiences after the Shoah and the World War II that people need help to come from silence to storytelling or to telling their stories, because on so many occasions, shame or trauma prevents them from being even able to come into speech, to come into language. And I wonder whether something can talk about what I would call a kind of a politics of storytelling, even that accompanies the gathering of the evidence and the testimonies and so on. But the politics of storytelling is something else that is more oriented towards healing, more oriented towards enabling people to kind of give their experiences some meaning. You said we have to make sense of that, but how, collectively speaking, how is that even possible with respect to unspeakable crimes that nevertheless need to find some kind of language? Is there arts? Are there programs that are projected now? Is there something that can be done from here with respect to that? Can you talk about that a little bit? Thank you.
No, sure. It's a huge, very important topic, and coincidentally, I mean, there are projects to address what you're speaking about, and there are some projects that were designed here in this university, in Northwestern University. So we can talk after the event. Benjamin Frommer is here, and Jennifer Lucky is here. They're working on the project called Epistemic Reparations. And the idea of this project is, very much the same what you just said, that people have this fundamental right that the story should be heard and recorded, and people should be able to tell this story. There are a lot of ongoing ad hoc studies, not studies, but projects like that in Ukraine. People try to record voices of people. People try to get memories of people for various reasons. Some are from legal perspective. They just want to get testimonies, so for future courts. Some people try to help those who have trauma, and these people are professionally trained as psychologists. Some people just want to be helpful. It's about helping a displaced person or helping a refugee and sometimes it's just spontaneous. I myself, I had my own diary, and I forgot about that. Actually, during my first week when I stayed in Kyiv, I kept diary, and I was very dramatic. I kept diary, and every evening I was sending it to my scientific advisor for my PhD. And I'm like, well, Javier, remember me, I'm your student, I'm in Kyiv. So I was sending him these diaries, and I completely forgot about that. I was checking my emails recently, and I found it. So people really, they have this, it was very spontaneous. It was just that I have to tell my story, So, and together with the local team, we also are designing, planning some steps to collect such testimonies in Ukraine and to make them accessible. I don't know if there should be policies to do that. I think there is a lot of professionals around the world who have been engaged in similar activities. So there are protocols, there are best practices that we can adopt, but I don't think that it should be a policy or, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, please. Sergey.
Sergei Kucherenko, Graduate School. You mentioned nukes, and I believe, Annalise, you hosted yesterday an event or talk about nuclear disarmament. So I want to ask about what is the nuclear outlook for Ukraine? We all know that in '91, Ukraine was the third world largest nuclear arsenal, essentially. Ukrainians give up all that in exchange for guarantees of territorial integrity and independence and security from the United States, Great Britain and Russia. It didn't help. So now Russian Federation is using the same strategic aviation that Ukrainians have dismantled, and is using the ballistic missiles, cruise missiles that are capable of carrying nuclear warheads, and they're actually penetrating the defense system and hitting the targets, including the capital. So what's, in your opinion, is there are two extreme scenarios? Is it possible that the Russian Federation would use nuclear weapons at a tactical or strategic level on the battlefield or on the government quarters in Kyiv? Or another extreme scenario, do you see a possibility that during the Ukrainian counteroffensive, perhaps special forces can capture 2, 3, 4 warheads that are currently stationed on Crimea, and so they can ascend to the level of Israel. That officially doesn't have nuclear weapons, but guarantees retaliation. I was reading yesterday, for instance, there was expeditious evacuation of the nuclear warheads from the Belgorod region in Russia, because Russian military opposition took hold of 3 villages there. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, look, it's definitely not my area, so I will speculate here a lot. I don't know. Maybe it's my more naive understanding, but I think if Russians they had many opportunities to use nuclear weapons already, including small tactical loads, and they have not done it. And I think that the idea of deterrence still works. I don't buy that they're crazy enough to start doing this. And in this sense, I think that Ukraine, to capture our own nuclear missiles, I think it would be redundant. I think the current level of international deterrence is enough to prevent Russia from attacking us. But I don't know. I'm hesitant because as a citizen of Ukraine, I want maximum security, and if capturing a few missiles can guarantee this to us, I'm fine with that. But I'm definitely not an expert, and I don't know how to address this question, so I apologize. Yeah.
And let's remember that small tactical nuclear weapons are several times stronger than those that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the word small is problematic. All right, with that editorial comment, it remains to thank Tymofii, and if we could all move quickly out to the reception area, which is around the corner, so that colleagues can set up in here, we'll have a chance to continue the conversation informally. Tymofii, thank you so much for your comments today.
Thank you.